Eilidh's condition wasn't something that we knew about when I was pregnant or even when she was born in 2010. She was born at 38.5 weeks, pretty normal, delivered by Von Toos, and we were in hospital for her whole first week because she needed IV antibiotics due to a meconium infection. During that time, a selection of symptoms presented themselves, which prompted an overnight in NICU, and the neonatal doctor ordered some ultrasounds, a skull x-ray, and some chromosomal tests before we were discharged. As first-time parents, some of these things didn't really mean a lot to us, and we didn't have much to compare our experience with. So things like midline head lump and Moro reflex, wasn't really something we knew a great deal about. A heart murmur was also identified as a hole in the heart, which would probably heal itself, although in the end it actually needed open heart surgery. So all the tests came back in normal range, and we thought, oh, that's a relief, and we're sent home with our new baby. However, gradually, Eilidh didn't quite fit the typical baby world. Feeding was always difficult from the start, initially put down to the infection, but she continued to struggle with weight, and our house often resembled scenes from The Exorcist due to her chronic reflux. And it became apparent that she was missing milestones in her red book and falling behind her peers. So we had more tests, but more normal results. It wasn't ever really made clear that that's actually quite common to get normal results on the genetic tests that were available at that time. And in the beginning, I can see that it's probably not a great tactic to frighten new parents. But as we were several months down the line, knew we weren't meeting milestones, we were left feeling pretty confused, and even felt a bit paranoid. Individual professionals were all great and always asked if we had any questions, but at that time, how did we know what questions even to ask? So at around a year old, Eilidh began to gather lots of medical specialists, referrals to therapists, and there began to be mentions of developmental delays and low muscle tone. So more tests and more normal results. I've tried to list here all the people that we've come into contact so far with, that beyond the usual health visitor and GP that you would expect with a typical child. It's calmed down a bit for us now, but in the early days it was pretty overwhelming seeing all the different people. And without any name, diagnosis, or even confirmation that there was a thing, we didn't really feel that we qualified to join in with any special needs activities or groups, and we felt very isolated. And it wasn't until quite later that we found SWAN UK, Syndromes Without a Name, which is a national online community, and then later Cambridge Rare Disease Network's Unique Feet Group, which is a local community. In 2012, Eilidh was entered into the DDD study, a sort of precursor to whole genome sequencing, which looked at specific developmental disorders. And back in the olden days of 2012, genome sequencing took a long time, and in Eilidh's case, it was over four years before they found a change on the CAT6A gene, and we'd almost forgotten we'd been on the study by that time. The diagnosis was confirmed by blood test, and we had a follow-up chat with genetics, who said as it was such a new diagnosis, there was not much known, and pointed us to some studies, but there was no pathway, and no rare disease clinic, so not much changed in Eilidh's actual day-to-day care. Meanwhile, we found a newly found foundation based in the US, and a Facebook patient group. At that time, only 70 children had been diagnosed, but now the CAT6 Foundation supports both CAT6A and CAT6B conditions and lists around 500 people diagnosed across the world, including around 20 to 25 in the UK. Receiving the diagnosis has been really beneficial, because without the diagnosis, there's just no option but to react to symptoms. And actually, we're still sort of in that phase due to there not being much known about her specific condition, and continue to float around between different specialties. But at least there's something tangible. And as diagnoses increase, so does the potential for better research and better understanding of what Cat6 means. It also allows access to support networks and sharing of ideas and therapies, and pointing each other out new research to help our young people. Just want to briefly touch on this one, because this is, I'm absolutely no expert, but I think it's really important that ethics is always discussed in any genomics dialogue, especially around increasing access to antenatal testing, which I know we'll be talking about later today. The rapid increase in knowledge is amazing, obviously, for things like cancers and heart disease, but it's also a little bit frightening for other diversity, and as a sort of inclusion advocate, I want to make sure everybody understands that not all genetic differences are negative, and it would be very boring if we were all normal. For example, I don't know what we would have done had we been given an antenatal diagnosis for Eilidh. What would the narrative have been like about Cat6? Would her quality of life be brought into question? And whose perception of quality of life would that be? Eilidh's got a genetic glitch, but that glitch makes her who she is, but it's not all of who she is. So it's therefore super important that disabled people, neurodiverse and learning disabled people, are visible in our community and that are part of these conversations, so that everybody has an understanding of what real life is really like, and not just the worst case scenarios and medical risks. So what now for us? Overall, Eilidh's had amazing care, but there's obviously been lots of limitations on what can be done with the information that's around, and also coordination of that care. For example, all of Eilidh's symptoms would be considered normal paediatric issues, so a lot of the time they weren't joined up until she got the diagnosis, and we always felt that we were being passed from one department to the other. And that's not changed greatly yet. At the moment, responding to Eilidh's genetic diagnosis involves me, an architect, trying to decipher research information, mostly from the USA, and trying to cherry-pick information that seems to be relevant for Eilidh and palatable for the NHS system, which of course is very different because the information is coming from the US. Everybody's doing things very differently over there. So the onus is very much on us to push for referrals, request access to medications or therapies, and we've had mixed success in achieving things like that. For example, it took 3 years from her genetic diagnosis to actually get to see a metabolic consultant to allow us to try a supplement, which actually seems to be really helping Eilidh now. So yeah, it would have been great to have had access to that sooner. So we pretty much have that, this same word cloud of people involved, and there's no real lead clinician and no pathway as such. So it would be great to have someone who sort of took ownership of rare disease, even if it's not an expert in her individual condition, because obviously with so many, no one's ever going to be an expert in all rare conditions. I think it's also really important that awareness is spread generally among frontline professionals, like health visitors and people who families will come into contact with first, because I think there's still a real, people are still not aware that being undiagnosed is a thing, and that actually, you know, it can take a long time, even still, to get to whole genome sequencing and things like that. And yeah, so it's only kind of dawned on us as time went on, especially after meeting more and more people in a similar boat, that with children as rare as Eilidh, clinicians and therapists probably haven't seen many of her at all, if ever, and that our own experience ought to form part of the wider picture for her care. And we've become more confident in expressing things that we think are relevant and things that Eilidh teaches us about herself when meeting new professionals. And we want clinicians to know, certainly for us, that it's okay to say that you don't know, because we know that it's, rare and complicated. And we want to work together because we're ultimately on the same side. We're on Eilidh's side. So yeah, all we really want from Eilidh's genetic diagnosis is to find ways for her to better reach her potential. That's me. Finished.